To talk more about the unfinished Dinkytown apartment complex and other housing concerns is the Republican lead of the Senate Housing and Homelessness Prevention Committee, Senator Eric Lucero. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You wear several hats that inform your perspective on housing issues. You are a licensed real estate agent, a licensed general contractor. You're also a landlord. What's your perspective on the recent Senate hearing on the delayed completion of the Identity Dinkytown project and its impact on students?
Absolutely. I think as we saw highlighted, this is a terrible situation. Being a college student, former college student myself, having gone to the University of Minnesota, clearly the impact, the negative impact, the stress that this is causing on students is absolutely devastating. This is not a good situation. It's one that I'm very appreciative that we had a hearing to highlight the complications and the struggles that the students are going through, and then to be able to have a productive conversation on what we could do from a statewide perspective going forward in terms of policy. But one of the things that is always in the back of my mind when it comes to any conversation on any bill is we don't want to create state law, policy across the board on specific situations. We don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction in response to an unfortunate situation. Because when it comes, as you mentioned, as a housing provider myself, there are many different types of housing across the state. In this case, it's student housing. But there are single-family homes, there's multifamily homes, there's high-rises, there's all kinds of different scenarios. And we cannot create this one-size-fits-all policy in response to a crisis, and again, think that that's not going to have unintended consequences.
If a company or building that is building a new apartment building collects rent from lessees while knowing that that project will not be completed on time, which is what is happening here in Dinkytown, should lessees be allowed to break their lease so that they can find another place to live?
Well, a lease fundamentally is a contract. And in any contract, there are two parties. In this case, there are tenants and then there's the housing provider. And when it comes to any contract, there are obligations and expectations of both sides of this, the contract. What's happening here is the housing provider is not delivering their end of the contract. And so should a person be expected to pay rent? Absolutely not. Now, when it gets to the next questions, it's, well, what is the cause for the delay? How long will it be until the unit is available? And therein lies the greater question when it comes to breaking a contract. Because, as I mentioned in the previous question, one-size-fits-all policy cannot necessarily work in all different types of scenarios. And so in this case, certainly the unit is not available per the contract. So Identity Dinkytown is not living up to their end of the bargain. So then, should there be an expectation to pay rent? Clearly not. When will it be available? That's the question. Now, it's my understanding from written testimony submitted by Identity Dinkytown Property Management is that the general contractor project manager informed the project management company the day after first month's rent was collected. So I don't know if they knew that it wouldn't be completed or not, but the reality is contracts need to be adhered to, and we need to be understanding that rent shouldn't be paid in such a scenario.
This situation is just bringing up lots of questions, which we're exploring. Another question I have is, this Dinkytown issue is likely an uncommon situation, and it's complex, as you've said, in very unique ways. However, Housing and Homelessness Prevention Chair Lindsay Port did say to the committee that landlord-tenant laws have not been updated in this state in quite some time. From a broader perspective, do you believe that there is a need to update landlord-tenant law in the state of Minnesota?
All laws in the state of Minnesota absolutely need to have review and updating where necessary. But just because a law might be old doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or needs to be changed. What needs to happen is understanding that there's an equation. And in this equation, on one side you have the housing provider, and on the other side you have the tenants. And it has to be a balanced equation. My concern with the current Democrat majority is that they're only focused on one side of the equation, lacking the perspective of the housing providers. Here's the reality. If this equation becomes imbalanced, when there's more risk that's created by the housing provider or on the housing provider, they can only make up for that increased risk by increasing the price. So the more risky it is, the longer it takes to go through whatever requirements and mandates that the Democrat majority wants to put in there, the more risky it becomes for them, and then the more they raise rent. That is not good for anybody. The other thing that's puzzling to me, though, is this last legislative session, incredible changes were made to tenant landlord law. And so it was very puzzling when I heard the remarks from Chair Port. I did hear her say that in coming next session, but again, the Democrat majority made significant changes already. So I'm not entirely sure what she's referring to when she says that.
Last session, several DFL members introduced a bill that would prohibit real estate developers from purchasing single-family homes and turning them into rentals. And I'm not trying to conflate that issue with the Dinkytown issue, but a concern was raised in the hearing about the idea of out-of-state corporate ownership of apartment complexes, which Dinkytown is, I believe, an example of. So when affordable housing is scarce, and this goes to your point about increased risk, is it appropriate to look at limiting corporate or out-of-state ownership as a way of controlling cost?
When there's a limit in supply, the most appropriate question to be asking is, what is the reason why there's a limit in supply? And the reason that there's a limit in supply has nothing to do with corporate entities purchasing real estate. Now, a larger question for a different time, or a larger answer would be, what is the difference, or why does it matter what type of entity is on title? Whether it's an individual, whether it's a partnership, whether it's an LLC or LLP, whether it be an S Corp or a C Corp. It doesn't matter who is on title. What matters is that tenants are treated fairly and protected, and that housing providers are similarly protected. Whether they're in-state or out-of-state, the corporate entity or the entity type doesn't matter. And so what we need to focus on is, why is there a lack of supply? That's the appropriate question to be asking. And the clear answer why there's a lack of supply is because there hasn't been building. Hasn't been building at the rates to keep up with demand. Why hasn't there been building to keep up with the rates of demand? Clearly, it's because of government overregulation. If you look at an examination earlier this year, I think it was March, a study was released showing the cost of new construction of a medium-priced single-family home. And in Minnesota, it is $100,000 more expensive to build in Minnesota than it is in North Dakota. $120,000 more expensive to build the same median single-family priced home in Minnesota than it is in Wisconsin. $150,000 more expensive to build that home in Minnesota than it is in Iowa, and $175,000 more expensive to build in Minnesota than in South Dakota. So the question becomes, why is that? Do we have different climates in South Dakota and Wisconsin? No. Are they suffering the same types of pressures for labor and building material costs? Absolutely. So those are the same. What is different then? It is government regulation. The cost of construction in Minnesota has skyrocketed, and the answer certainly cannot be introducing more government mandates thinking that's going to be a solution.
As lawmakers gear up for the next legislative session, what areas of housing and homelessness prevention need the most attention in your view, and what legislation might you be proposing?
Well, as I mentioned in a previous question, skyrocketing housing prices are creating a hardship on everybody. So the question becomes, what is the root cause of increasing costs of housing, whether it be rent or whether it be home ownership? And the reality is, as I mentioned, it is not any of these other variables, such as weather, climate, or labor, or building material costs, because those are similar in surrounding states. The question is not why is it expensive in Minnesota, but why is it more expensive in Minnesota? So the conversation and the legislation last session and that I'll be doing next session focused on is that root cause, addressing the skyrocketing prices. Now, how do we do that? We roll back the government mandates. It is the government mandates that are increasing risk on housing providers. That increased risk translates into increased rental prices. It is the increased building code and energy mandates that are increasing the cost of construction. Those get passed on. And so we need to address government mandates, rolling some of those back to be more competitive and comparable to our surrounding states, and therefore decrease the cost of living.
Senator Eric Lucero, it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you so much.